As the spring of 1945 unfolded across a shattered Europe, the United States Air Forces found themselves at the pinnacle of their strategic bombing campaign, with the skies above Nazi Germany transformed into a graveyard of Luftwaffe ambitions and American resolve tested to its breaking point. The 8th Air Force, based in England's East Anglia from airfields like Thorpe Abbotts and Bassingbourn, had evolved from the ragtag bomber groups of 1942 into a juggernaut capable of launching over 1,000 heavy bombers in a single mission. Their B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, laden with high explosive and incendiary ordnance that rained down on the Third Reich's industrial heartland with unyielding precision. By March, the German air defenses were a shadow of their former selves, the once feared Luftwaffe reduced to sporadic sorties by a handful of aging Me-109s and FW-190s, their pilots a mix of teenagers and veterans, flying with fuel rationed to mere hours per week. Yet in the final desperate weeks leading to April, Hitler ordered the activation of his ultimate aerial gamble, the Me-262 jet fighters, armed with R-4M unguided rockets, designed to ram or rocket Allied bomber streams in suicide missions that would signal the Führer's unhinged determination to prolong the agony. The stage was set for the most intense air battles over Berlin since the early days of the war, where American pilots, many on their 25th or 30th mission and facing the grim reality of rotating home or death, confronted not just flak and fighters, but the psychological weight of knowing they were breaking the back of a regime on the verge of collapse. Major General Jimmy Doolittle, commanding the 8th Air Force since 1942, had shifted tactics from high-altitude daylight precision bombing to low-level runs when weather obscured targets, a decision born from the frustration of 1944's Big Week, where clouds foiled Norden bomb sites and dispersed bomb patterns over miles of farmland instead of factories. Doolittle's crews, numbering over 200,000 personnel scattered across 48 bomb groups and 15 fighter groups, flew from muddy runways where P-51 Mustangs with drop tanks extended their range to 1,000 miles, escorting the bombers through skies patrolled by radar-directed 88mm flak guns that formed black puffs of death at 25,000 feet. The B-17G, with its chin turret and supercharged Wright 1820 engines pushing 1,200 horsepower, carried 12.50 caliber machine guns and 8,000 pounds of bombs, but against the Me-262's 540 mile-per-hour speed and 430mm cannons, the fortresses were sitting ducks, their formations tight to maximize defensive fire, but vulnerable to the jets' hit-and-run tactics. On March 18, 1945, one of the largest raids of the war launched, with 1,329 heavy bombers and 733 fighters targeting Berlin's marshalling yards and synthetic oil plants, a mission that would become legendary for its ferocity and the desperate measures taken by both sides. The Armada formed up over the North Sea at dawn, the drone of 4,000 engines audible from miles away as navigators plotted courses using dead reckoning and GH radio navigation, their Norden bomb sites calibrated for visual bombing despite 10/10 cloud cover that forced many to use H-2X radar, a British-developed system that painted ground returns on a cathode ray tube, but often confused urban sprawl with open fields. Leading the 3rd Bomb Division was Brigadier General Frederick Anderson, Jr., flying in Dame Rebecca from the 94th Bomb Group, his Pathfinder force marking targets with smoke pots and PFF flares that guided the stream through the soup. As the formation crossed the Dutch coast, German radar at Dierstedt picked up the blips, alerting flak batteries around Berlin and scrambling what remained of Jagdgeschwader 7, the world's first jet fighter unit under Colonel Gordon Golub, whose 70 Me-262s waited at Peratz airfield, their Jumo 004 turbojets idling with precious aviation fuel siphoned from training stocks. The American escorts, P-51Ds from the 4th Fighter Group, led by Colonel Donald Blakesley, swept ahead at 30,000 feet, their Packard Merlin engines supercharged to 1,490 horsepower, armed with 6 50-cal guns and 85-gallon drop tanks that allowed loitering over the target for 30 minutes, but the jet's speed meant they struck and vanished before Mustangs could react. At 11:30 hours, the first jets dove from 12,000 feet, firing salvos of 24 R-4M rockets each, unguided 55mm projectiles packed with 150 grams of hexagen explosive that detonated on proximity fuse, shredding B-17 wings and fuselages in clusters of 24 bombers going down in flames over the capital. Lieutenant Colonel William "Pappy" Tyler's 401st Bomb Squadron bore the brunt, losing 8 fortresses in 8 minutes as the jets weaved through the formation. Their pilots, many with 200 hours on type but no combat experience, aiming for the lead ship to break the box, the interlocking fire from tail, ball, and top turrets spewing 600 rounds per minute but too slow to track the silver streaks. Sergeant Paul Gerling, a waist gunner in Knockout Dropper from the 100th Bomb Group, recalled the chaos in his post-war account. The sky filled with tracers and smoke. The jets came out of nowhere like lightning, rockets exploding around us, turning planes into fireballs. I saw friends of 25 missions go down screaming on the radio. The 100th, known as the Bloody 100th for losses at Regensburg in 1943, lost 5 ships that day, their crews bailing out over burning suburbs where civilians below, starving and bombed out, sometimes aided downed airmen while Gestapo hunted them. Flak from 1,200 88mm and 128mm guns around Tempelhof and Gatow added to the toll. Shells bursting in the lead squadron at 23,000 feet, shrapnel perforating fuselages and igniting fuel lines, with bombardiers like Captain John Ernst in Roundhauser, nursing his B-17 home on 2 engines, his Norden sight shattered but bombs away on the marshalling yards that fed Berlin's rail network. The raid scale overwhelmed defenses. 1,329 bombers dropped 3,000 tons of HE and incendiaries, cratering tracks and oil depots, but at cost of 24 bombers and 6 fighters, 178 Americans killed, wounded, or captured, with the Luftwaffe claiming 21 victories for 3 jets lost, their pilots, like Lieutenant Alfred Schreiber, parachuting into the ruins to fight as infantry. For the Americans, the mission exemplified the desperation of late war flying, where crews on their 30th sortie faced odds of 50% survival, morale sustained by letters from home and the knowledge that each raid shortened the war. Back at base, ground crews swarmed damaged fortresses, replacing engines and patching holes with Scotch ply, while navigators pored over mission reports showing the jet's tactics. High-speed passes from 6 o'clock low, rockets fired at 300 meters, prompting Doolittle to order tighter formations and P-51 weave patterns to flush out the jets. Hitler, in the Führerbunker beneath the Chancellery Garden, received reports of the raid via Colonel General Karl Kohler of the Luftwaffe, his rage at the Jewish Bolshevik bombers tempered by the knowledge that his wonder weapons, the Me-262s, had finally scored against the unescorted heavies.
though in truth, the P-51s downed 2 jets in dogfights over Brandenburg, their pilots, like Captain John Landers of the 357th Fighter Group, pushing their Mustangs to 480 miles per hour in dives to catch the jets on takeoff.
The raid's aftermath saw Berlin's civilians digging out from rubble, the marshalling yards paralyzed for days, delaying troop movements to the Oder front, where Zhukov's Soviets massed for the final assault. American crews, debriefed by intelligence officers over coffee and K rations, shared tales of jets like silver bullets and flak thick as hail. Their gunners claiming kills with 50 cal bursts that riddled Met 262 fuselages, though confirmation came later from Luftwaffe records showing 21 aircraft destroyed on the ground by strafing Mustangs. April brought even more desperate missions, with the 8th launching daily raids on Berlin's remnants, aircraft factories at Oranienburg, U-boat pens at Schriemende, where weather forced low-level runs at 10,000 feet, exposing bombers to small arms and 20mm fire from rooftops, the Berlin Express nickname born from the constant stream of sorties. On April 7th, as Soviet artillery shelled the city's outskirts, 600 B-17s hit the Heinkel works at Oranienburg, escorted by 400 P-51s that tangled with the last Met 262s in furballs over the Elbe, where Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, a double ace from the 56th Fighter Group, downed 2 jets with 6-gun bursts, his Mustang Tar Heel Hal returning with 200 holes. The pilot's stories filled the airfields. Navigator Lieutenant William Cameron's B-17 Lucky 13 lost 3 engines to flak over Potsdam, limping home on the 4th, while crew nursed wounded radio man Sergeant Frank Tomaselli, who died en route. His last words over interphone, "Tell my wife I love her." Bomber pilot Captain Charles C. Kegney of the 303rd Bomb Group flew the April 10th mission to Berlin's Siemens factories, his Hells Angels formation hit by R-4M rockets that vaporized the deputy lead, forcing Kegley to weave through debris and flames, the cockpit filling with glycol smoke as gunners called bandits 6 o'clock high. These airmen, averaging 22 years old with 500 hours flying time, faced the psychological toll of seeing friends vanish in explosions, their pre-mission briefings showing maps of Berlin's flak belts, red zones where survival odds dropped to 30%, yet they climbed into cockpits without hesitation, driven by duty, camaraderie, and the end in sight. Hitler, monitoring from his bunker via teletype from Goering's Karenhall, saw the raids as proof of Allied desperation to destroy his capital before the Soviets arrived, ordering more jets into ramming missions under Sonderkommando Elbe, though American pilots countered with P-47 Thunderbolts from the 9th Air Force supporting ground troops, their pilots like Colonel Francis Gabreski strafing Luftwaffe fields to prevent scrambles. The April 16th mission, with 1,200 bombers hitting Berlin's last oil refineries, saw the Luftwaffe's final gasp. 20 Met 262s rising from Jüterbog, their rockets claiming 4 B-24s before P-51s from the 20th Fighter Group sent them crashing in flames. Ace Captain Clarence Anderson adding his 16th victory, his Mustang Old Crow dodging 30mm tracers in a turning fight at 20,000 feet. Ground crews at Debden worked through the night, welding armor plate and replacing oxygen systems, while pilots like Lieutenant Colonel David Schilling planned escort patterns that layered coverage from 5,000 to 30,000 feet, their drop tanks jettisoned at the IP, initial point, to engage bandits. The human cost mounted. Over 300 airmen lost in April alone, with crews like the 351st Bomb Group's Yankee Powerhouse returning with half their squadron. Pilot Lieutenant Robert Rosenthal nursing his B-17 home on 3 engines after Flak severed hydraulic lines, his bombardier calling "bombs away" through blood streaming from shrapnel wounds. These desperate skies over Berlin in 1945 were the crucible where American pilots forged victory, their stories of endurance and bravery echoing through the final days as the Reich collapsed under the weight of unopposed air power. As April 1945 dawned over the shattered remnants of Nazi Germany, the United States Army Air Forces intensified their assault on Berlin with a ferocity that reflected both strategic necessity and the grim determination to end the war before it consumed more lives, with the 8th Air Force launching daily missions from East Anglian bases, where runways turned to mud under spring rains, but pilots like Captain John C. Egan of the 418th Squadron, 100th Bomb Group, climbed into their B-17s undeterred, their crews a mix of veterans on their 35th mission and green replacements fresh from stateside training, all bound for the Big B that had become a symbol of the Reich's defiance. The April 3rd raid targeted the Daimler-Benz engine factory at Genshagen, 15 miles south of the capital, with 600 B-17s and B-24s forming up at 8,000 feet due to solid overcast, their pathfinders using H-2X radar to drop bombs on what appeared as a gray smear on screens. The Norden bomb sites useless in the soup, but the lead crews pressing on through turbulence that bucked fuselages and tested bomb bay doors. Egan, flying Piccadilly Lily 2, led the 399th Squadron through flak that climbed like black staircases, the 88mm shells from 1C batteries detonating close enough to pepper his wings with shrapnel. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Robert Rosenthal, calling evasive turns, while tail gunner Sergeant Paul Gerling tracked Me-109s on interphone, their 50 cals barking at shadows in the clouds. The mission dropped 1,200 tons, cratering assembly lines that produced Me-109 engines, but losses mounted. 3 fortresses down from flak collisions, and 2 from mid-air, with Egan nursing his ship home on 3 engines, glycol leaking from number 4, as Ground Crew Chief Master Sergeant Ross G. Mullins waited at Thorpe Abbotts with a team ready to patch 150 holes overnight. For the pilots, April meant shorter daylight, but longer nights in briefings where intelligence officers pinned maps showing Berlin's flak belts, over 2,000 guns ringing the city, their radar-directed fire accurate to 100 yards at 25,000 feet, forcing formations to corkscrew evasions that scattered boxes and exposed stragglers. On April 7, as Soviet artillery thundered across the Oder, 800 bombers hit the Heinkel Aircraft Works at Oranienburg. The lead group from the 3rd Division encountered 15 Me-262 jets that screamed in at 500 miles per hour, their R-4M rockets exploding in the formation like chain lightning, ripping the tail off Yankee Doodle Dandy from the 92nd Group, pilot Captain William R. Law bailing out over enemy territory, where he evaded capture for 3 days before reaching American lines. The jets, piloted by aces like Oberleutnant Kurt Welter of JG-7, used hit-and-run tactics, diving from the sun to fire 24 rockets per pass before climbing out of P-51 range, claiming 5 bombers for 2 jets lost to Mustang pilots from the 357th Group, led by Captain Chuck Yeager, who downed an Me-262 with a deflection shot at 20,000 feet, his P-51D Glamorous Glen III returning with cannon plugs from 30mm hits. Yeager, a 21-year-old from West Virginia with 11 victories already, described the engagement in debrief.
The jet came out of nowhere, faster than anything I'd seen, but I led him high and hard, the 50s stitching his wing until he smoked and spun.
For bomber crews, the jets were terror incarnate, their silver fuselages glinting briefly before rockets turned planes into fireballs, with Navigator Lieutenant William J. Hesley of the 390th Group recalling the April 17th Dresden diversion, intended for marshalling yards but cloud-forced onto the city, where Flak from Flak Towers shredded his B-17 checkerboard fort, wounding his radio man and forcing a bailout over Czechoslovakia. Hesley captured but liberated weeks later as the war crumbled. These missions tested the limits of human endurance, with crews flying 10-hour sorties in unpressurized fuselages, where temperatures dropped to -40 degrees, oxygen masks freezing and frostbite claiming fingers. Yet gunners like Sergeant Chris Crest in the tail manned their turrets through fear, his .5 cal jamming from cold but cleared with bare hands as Me-109s pressed attacks from 5 o'clock level. Hitler's bunker received frantic reports from Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring, who promised more jets from production lines at Regensburg. But fuel shortages grounded half the Me-262s, their Jumo engines requiring rare C3 fuel that Allied raids had cut off, leaving pilots like Lieutenant Alfred Schreiber to taxi for takeoff under P-47 strafing that riddled runways with .5 cal fire. American escorts dominated the skies, the 56th Fighter Group under Colonel David C. Schilling claiming 20 victories on April 10 over the Siemens factories, Schilling's P-47 Thunderbolt downing 2 FW-190s in a swirling dogfight at 15,000 feet, his wingman, Lieutenant Oliver J. Turner, covering as Flak burst nearby, the pair returning to Boxted with ammunition depleted but spirits high. The April 16th Berlin Express raid, with 1,200 bombers hitting the last synthetic oil plants at Ruhland, saw the Luftwaffe's final coherent opposition. 30 Me-262s rising from Brandenburg-Brest, their rockets claiming 6 B-24s before P-51s from the 20th Group, led by Major Frederick J. Christensen, intercepted. Christensen's Mustang top dog exploding a Me-262 with a head-on pass, shrapnel wounding his canopy, but victory confirmed by gun camera film. Ground crews at Chelveston worked miracles, replacing engines and hydraulic systems overnight, while pilots like Lieutenant Colonel Robert B. Tresseder planned low-level runs for April 20, Hitler's birthday, targeting the Tempelhof airfield. The formation flying at 8,000 feet through light flat to drop 500-pounders on hangars, but clouds forced radar bombing that missed by miles, though P-38 Lightnings from the 370th Group strafed the field, destroying 10 U-88s on the ground. For the crews, the end was in sight, but danger constant, with Bombardier Captain Robert Rosenthal of the 100th Group flying Roundhauser on April 29 to Bernburg, his ship holed 300 times by Flak but bombs away on the aircraft works. Rosenthal later awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for leading the wing home despite fires in the bomb bay. Hitler's reaction in the bunker was apoplectic, screaming at Kohler about betrayal by the Luftwaffe as reports showed Berlin's skies filled with American bombers daily, the capital a sea of flames from incendiaries that gutted the Reichstag district and Zoo Flak Tower, where 128mm guns fired until barrels melted. American pilots, sensing victory, flew with renewed vigor. Lieutenant Edward R. Kirkland of the 365th Fighter Group downing 3 Me-109s on April 12 over Cottbus, his P-47 Lucky returning with 50 hits but pilot unscathed. Kirkland's evasion after a later crash landing becoming legend as he walked 100 miles to Allied lines disguised as a Dutch worker. The April 25 mission to Pilsen, diverted by clouds to Prague marshalling yards, saw Lieutenant William Hensley's crew in Checkerboard Fort take direct flak hits, the ship disintegrating mid-air. Hensley parachuting into German hands but surviving to marry his fiancée months later,
his story symbolizing the war's toll on young lives. Escort pilots pushed limits. Captain Bud Anderson of the 357th adding 2 victories on April 18th over the Elbe bridges, his Mustang evading Me-262 rockets in a high-speed chase. Anderson's 16 kills, making him the group's top ace as the Luftwaffe faded. By late April, with Soviets shelling Berlin's S-Bahn, American bombers flew milk runs to secondary targets, but danger persisted. On April 29, the 303rd Group's Hell's Angels lost 2 ships to Flak over Stendal. Pilot Captain Charles Keighley ditching in the Elbe, his crew swimming to shore under fire, but rescued by P-47s circling overhead. Hitler's final days saw him ranting about wonder weapons as Me-262s made their last sorties, one ramming a B-17 on April 7th under Sonderkommando Elbe orders, the jet exploding on impact, but pilot parachuting to infamy. American airmen flying 50 missions some, rotated home to parades and Purple Hearts, their stories filling V-mail letters to families. The skies over Berlin now silent, save for the rumble of T-34s approaching from the east. These desperate battles broke the Reich's back, the pilots' bravery ensuring May 8th's VE Day. Their losses, over 26,000 8th Air Force dead, are etched in memorials at Cambridge American Cemetery, where white crosses mark the fallen who broke Hitler's sky. As the final days of April 1945 unfolded in a Europe scarred by 5 years of total war, the United States Army Air Force's pilots entered the denouement of their campaign over Nazi Germany with a mix of exhaustion, exhilaration, and unrelenting focus. Their daily missions now less about strategic destruction and more about mopping up the remnants of a regime collapsing under its own weight. With the 8th Air Force continuing sorties from East Anglian bases, where the spring thaw turned grass runways into quagmires. But crews like those of the 305th Bomb Group at Chelveston rose before dawn, checking B-17s for flak damage from the previous day's Berlin run. Their ground crews, master sergeants and privates working through the night with welding torches and rivet guns, ensuring engines turned over despite chronic oil leaks and supercharger failures. Major General Nathan Twining, overseeing the strategic air forces in Europe, had shifted emphasis to tactical support for ground advances, but Berlin remained a priority target, its factories and transport hubs vital to the Wehrmacht's last stands, prompting the April 16 mission, codenamed Milk Run, where 1,200 bombers, escorted by 900 fighters, targeted the synthetic oil plants at Ruhland and the marshalling yards at Oranienburg. The formation climbing through broken clouds over the Zuiderzee as navigators adjusted for winds gusting 30 knots from the northeast, their G-boxes crackling with Dutch resistance signals guiding the path to IP, initial point, over Magdeburg.
Lieutenant Colonel Robert B. Tresseder, leading the 92nd Bomb Group's 327th Squadron from Poddington, flew Little Boy Blue as lead ship. His bombardier, Captain Harold J. Smith, peering through the Norden sight at 22,000 feet, the crosshair centering on the oil refinery's distillation towers that belched black smoke from previous raids, while tail gunner Sergeant Louis Pastore scanned for bandits, his .50s trained on the 6 o'clock position where Me-109s of JG 300 lurked. Their pilots, veterans like Oberleutnant Emil Bitsch with 50 kills, but down to 20 hours fuel per month, making desperate intercepts from low level to avoid P-51 sweeps. The raid unfolded with textbook precision.
the lead box releasing 500-pounders at 11:45, the bombs tumbling through flak bursts that painted the sky black, detonating in strings across the facility and igniting secondary explosions that lit the Elbe Valley like a furnace. But losses came swift. 2 B-24s from the 93rd Group shredded by 88mm shells from Wittenberg batteries, their crews bailing into the river where German flak gunners' machine gun shoots, a war crime witnessed by P-47 Escorts from the 358th Group who strafed the sites in retaliation. Pilot Captain James Browning's Thunderbolt Snafu Special raking the emplacements with 800 rounds before pulling off with oil pressure dropping. For the bomber crews, the endgame brought relief mixed with horror, as April 18's mission to Berlin Siemens Electrical Works saw Lieutenant William Cameron's Lucky 13 from the 390th take a direct hit over Tiergarten, the starboard wing folding under 128mm fire. Cameron and co-pilot Lieutenant Frank Tomaselli wrestling controls for a 9G turn that saved the ship but injured radioman Sergeant Mike Kowalski, who applied sulfa powder to his leg wound while calling "Bandit 2 o'clock high." The crew downing an FW-190 with waist gunner Corporal Ed Novak's burst before limping home to Framingham, where medics airlifted Kowalski to hospital. His survival a small victory amid 15 losses that day. Escort pilots bore the brunt of the Luftwaffe's last gasps, with the 4th Fighter Group under Colonel Donald J.M. Blakesley sweeping Brandenburg on April 20, Hitler's 56th birthday, where P-51s tangled with 12 Me-262s from JG-7. Blakesley's big beautiful doll diving to intercept as jets fired R-4M rockets that missed the formation but claimed 2 Mustangs in the furball. Lieutenant John Godfrey, ace with 7.5 kills, maneuvering his tractor in a high G turn to line up a jet, his 6.50 cows stitching the fuselage until it smoked and crashed near Gatow. Godfrey's victory his 8th and last before rotation. The pilots debriefing at Debden with tales of jets faster than hell but fragile as glass. Ground support evolved too, with the 9th Air Force's P-47s and P-38s flying close air support for the First Army's advance to the Elbe. Pilots like Major Gerald R. Johnson of the 495th Squadron strafing troop columns on April 22, his Lightning Crumbo raking a convoy near Dessau with 20mm cannon fire, destroying 5 trucks before Flak clipped his wing, Johnson nursing the ship back across the Rhine to Y-34 at St. Trond, his 16.83 kills making him the group's top ace as VE Day loomed. In the Führer bunker, Hitler received Kohler's reports of the raids with mounting fury. The April 25 mission to Pilsen, diverted to Prague, destroying the Skoda works and 50 locomotives, prompting him to order Sonderkommando Elbe's ramming tactics, though American pilots countered with overwhelming numbers, the 357th Group's P-51s downing 8 jets on April 24 over Ludwigslust. Ace Captain Chuck Yeager adding 2 to his tally, his glamorous Glenn III evading 30mm tracers in a chase that pushed the Mustang to 500 miles per hour. Yeager later recounting in interviews how the jet pilots fought like cornered wolves but ran out of room. The human stories humanized the statistics, with Bombardier Captain Robert Rosenthal of the 100th Group flying Mi Amigo on April 29th to Bernburg's aircraft factories. His ship holed 400 times by Flak, but bombs away on the runways. Rosenthal awarded the DSC for leading the formation home despite fires. His crew, Navigator Lieutenant Benjamin Smith and Gunner Sergeant William R. Edstrom, crediting teamwork for survival. Edstrom's top turret jamming, but cleared mid-mission as MiG-109s pressed. April 30 brought the end, with 600 bombers hitting Obersalzberg, Hitler's eagle's nest, on the Führer's last day. The raid symbolic as Soviet troops stormed the Reichstag. American pilots like Lieutenant Colonel William D. Dunham of the 84th Fighter Group escorting the heavies, his P-47 downing a U-88 reconnaissance plane over the Bavarian Alps. Dunham's 15 victories capping a career that saw him fly 100 missions without a scratch. The war's close brought reflection, with crews at Bassingbourn celebrating VE Day on May 8th with beer and letters home, but losses lingered. Over 26,000 8th Air Force dead, their names etched at Mattingly Cemetery, where white marble marks the fallen. Pilots like Lieutenant Edward Kirkland, who evaded capture after April 12's crash, walking 120 miles to Allied lines disguised as a civilian. His story featured in post-war films, symbolizing resilience. Post-war, many pilots struggled with PTSD. Navigator William Hesley turning to teaching while haunted by bailout memories. Yeager becoming a test pilot, breaking the sound barrier in 1947, his Berlin victories paving the way. The legacy endures in aviation museums, the B-17 Memphis Belle at Dayton displaying flak jackets from April raids, the P-51 Old Crow at Chino with gun camera footage of MiG-262 kills, while veteran associations like the 8th Air Force Historical Society gather annually, sharing stories of Berlin skies where American bravery broke Hitler's aerial shield. These pilots, from farm boys to college graduates, flew into history, their desperate battles ensuring freedom's dawn, the roar of Merlin engines fading, but echoes resounding in every tale of sacrifice and triumph.